Hello, and welcome to the Sales Development Revolution video series. In this episode, we're going to focus on recruiting and hiring the right type of SDRs for your organization.
We chose this topic because every company has its own unique needs, obstacles, and market opportunities that should all be considered when hiring and training new SDRs.
Yeah, and as a manager, the knowledge you build and the past experiences you gain won't always be fully applicable to your current situation. Rather, the mission is more to tailor hiring and training practices to the specific environment your SDR team faces and foster that culture for driving sustainable results within that environment.
Exactly, AJ. To help shed knowledge on the topic, we've invited Alex Boyd to join us in a discussion. For those who aren't yet following him on LinkedIn, if there are any, Alex is the founder of RevenueZen, where he enables B2B startups to find success in marketing, outbound sales, and lead generation, the last of which will be our main focus.
Yeah, our conversation with Alex will teach you the right mindset for recruiting and hiring, how to empower your SDR team, and what kind of SDRs will be a good fit for you.
We covered a lot, so without further ado, AJ, I suppose we should begin.
Let's do it.
To frame this conversation a bit, SDRs are often viewed as this kind of cookie cutter role. And this causes managers to just take the content online that they read, or maybe their past experiences at other companies, and just continuously apply that same hiring approach everywhere they go. And in reality, we know this is not the right approach. It's unique to each company and their situation, and it's always changing as buyers change. And so this is a challenge, I think, for managers, because they have to figure out, what are the right type of hires for my specific situation at this company. So Alex, to kind of open it up to you, how is hiring for the SDR role shifting in your eyes?
It's a good question. And I've been guilty as everyone else of being in a company, doing things a certain way and getting things really dialed in. And, after, a year, 2 or 3 years, you're just in this mindset of, okay, I know what I'm doing. I have a system. This works. This is how you hire SDRs. This is how the SDR role is done. Same thing with AEs too. I see it with every sales and sometimes even marketing role. But really the thing to do is to enter any new situation, whether we're an agency with a client or whether you're internal and you're building your own SDR team, as having some beginner's mind about this stuff. And if it turns out that when you step back from what you know and look at what's in front of you in reality, and if you come to the conclusion that your same hiring process or similar hiring process is still the best fit, that's probably an uncommon answer. You might come to that answer, but it has to be based on what you see in front of you, right? And so oftentimes when I see people who go from, one SMB cold calling heavy environment to another, you're much more likely to have a similar hiring process. But if you're changing industries, if you're changing verticals, you're changing deal sizes, and you're growing as a person in that way, not to say that staying in your industry doesn't help you grow, but if you're changing what you're looking after, you're going to need to change a lot of other stuff too. And a lot of your gut feelings around who's a good SDR, based on enjoying the conversation with them and so forth, and picking up on those entry level hiring aspects like culture fit. And curiosity, those are all good things, but you may need to look very differently when you're going to mid-market, right, and going after directors of marketing versus owners of veterinary practices, right? One SDR will be a good fit for one, and one not for the other, right? So I think it's a matter of saying, okay, I know some things about a certain industry, a certain vertical, certain process. Those may or may not carry over, and I need to have those in my back pocket, but not lead with them and just sort of assume that your knowledge is going to stay current, because as many people are finding out, it doesn't necessarily, and it'll only get you so far. So I think it's taking the confidence in what you know and still having the humility to say, okay, what if I was a beginner with this? I know some things. Let's pretend I don't know anything. Let me just, pretend I'm learning this from scratch. What environment is this? Are we reaching people in the same way? Has anything changed? What's going on in this industry? Have I spoken to prospects? Do I know how they think, feel, and want to be contacted, right? And if those are the same things, great, but they should be real substantive questions instead of assumptions, which is the biggest thing that I see people make. So lose the assumptions and approach it with a fresh mind is my take on that.
I think that's really insightful because a lot of organizations tend to hire based on sort of like you alluded to, not necessarily the role, but based on qualifications. And it's weird because the SDR role was both viewed as sort of this entry level, fresh out of college, like you don't necessarily have a big repertoire of past experience, but a lot of organizations also look for people with experience in some capacity. So it's like you are in some way looking for some kind of qualification where at the same time, you really are, like you sort of mentioned, hiring based on the role. So if you have someone who's a better fit for a specific industry, maybe they don't have the qualifications that you were looking for, but you know, like you'd said, culture-wise or personality-wise, they would be a good fit. So taking some of those preconceived notions that you had before and throwing them out would be beneficial in that scenario, whereas in some cases they might not be.
Yeah, and I think that really touches up on an interesting idea, just that I don't really hear a lot when you're learning how to train salespeople, which is learning new approaches. I think it's very popular for experts to pop up and say, like, I came from this industry and I worked with this channel and I was rocking it, and so now I'm going to take it and make that the holy grail and preach it, and that's to kind of loop back around to the content that I think a lot of companies absorb. It tends to get generalized when in reality, if you're a small company, or let's say like an accounting software startup, you're going to approach your SDRs completely differently than you would if you were looking at a mid-sized ERP software, and so to kind of move to that, looking at SDRs that are having to sell at volume and, smaller deal sizes versus SDRs that are taking this more account-based approach, what are some of the considerations that we should look for, Alex, when trying to define and really decide how we want to go about hiring for those two different roles?
Yeah, it's a really good question. To give an example, right? So I've been in one environment where like team selling and committee buying was not much of an aspect most deals, but in some it was, right? And I had built a team that was mostly focused around people who could close transactional business quickly. So there was a mix, right? So some people who were very good at that, some people who could handle a bit of both and who were sort of in the middle and could be more conversation oriented and approach teams versus single buyers, right? So an example of when these two come into clash is I had an extremely strong salesperson who could just really nail it with the hard charging smile and dial conversations. But when a larger company would roll across their purview, I had to sort of like train him on how do you change your approach, right? It was difficult to get him to change his approach and be more honestly thoughtful and ask better questions and take a breather and sit back, versus being this like forward leaning, last day of the quarter mentality, right? So what we see now with, I think, the different roles we hire for, if I'm looking for somebody who's going to dial doctor's offices, I'm going to be looking for someone who can be always up, always kind of polite, enjoys being on the phone, talking to new people, enjoys that conversation and likes that. Cannabis dispensaries, same type of deal. Can you get someone who can balance the chill vibe of the cannabis industry with making $20, $40 a day, right? And having people pick up all the time, because if you're dialing brick and mortar, they're going to pick up. So you're having a lot of conversations. Whereas in my first job, I was making $80 a day, but I would only have maybe 25, 30 conversations because many people wouldn't pick up. So that's sort of what I'm looking for with people going after smaller companies is, do you enjoy that kind of up thought process? Like your theme song might be, quick tempo EDM, right? Someone who wants to just like, yeah, let's go, let's do it. And an enterprise focused salesperson or a CR is much the opposite, right? They're more analytical and enjoy these one-to-one conversations. You probably wouldn't catch them at a networking event mingling everywhere. You'd probably catch them kind of like hanging back for a bit and then finding one person they really want to talk to chatting about 15 minutes, having a really good conversation, asking some good questions, learning something, and doing that one more time, and coming out of the evening with 2 good connections and, you know, a solid meeting on the books, right? But they wouldn't be like making it rain with their business cards. It's a different mentality totally, and neither is good for the other, right? So that's kind of what I'm noticing with different personality profiles is I've had to shift my own mindset to be in both environments often. So when I'm hiring for a transactional SMB SDR, I'm literally looking for things that kind of annoy me sometimes. I, as a person, am more the latter, right? But when I'm hiring for that SMB profile, I'm not asking myself, do I like this person necessarily? I'm asking myself, does this person fit the role that we have in front of us? And as leaders, we need to put our own biases aside and say, maybe this is what I've done in the past, but this person is a better fit for the role we have. And I'm going to change my own self instead of trying to change the world in front of me, right? We can change ourselves way easier than we can change the, you know, the market you're selling to. I'd much rather do that than step into that mindset than try to force my opinion on the wrong place to go with hiring for a specific type of persona.
And I think you brought up a couple of good points, and I definitely wanted to touch on one that Grayson brought up as well, where he mentioned how organizations sort of come up with this ideal sort of prospecting method, or they're like, this is how it's worked for me, I'm going to write about it, and this is how it's going to work for you. But as we all know, and like you mentioned, it's very circumstantial. And I think that a lot of people sort of fall into a trap within their own companies where they're like, I know this is how it's supposed to be, so I'm going to find somebody who fits that mold and then go out and do it, when they could be in the total wrong industry. So just like you had been talking about, someone who might be in the SMB market with a more transactional piece of software, they have this, or the leadership behind them has this mentality of like a full ABM approach, and that just doesn't work. And that's something that I think a lot of organizations struggle to understand, because it's coming from thought leaders and they should be the ones who know everything. But it's like, you sometimes have to take a step back and really think for yourself and understand, like, this is what's best for my business, my specific situation, and how I can best leverage the talent around me to do that. So are you seeing organizations maybe, I wouldn't say shun thought leadership, but where like the direction of a lot of the people who are speaking about this, maybe it's holding less clout for some organizations, or are they still eating it up? Like, what is your sentiment on that?
Totally, yeah. And as someone who produces a fair amount of content on this stuff, like I write inordinately amounts of LinkedIn posts.
You
like,
are everywhere.
I apparently somehow. So I try to heavily qualify things, right? I try to have this. My college major was moral philosophy. I spent time heavily qualifying statements and like logically proceeding through arguments that weren't right or wrong, but trying to be very specific about how we think. And so I think we need to take one step back from all the thought leadership stuff that we see and think to ourselves, who is producing this and why, and what are their motives, right? If we ask those questions, it doesn't make them any less smart or thoughtful or appreciative. But you know, if I'm looking at the amazing research put out by Topo, I may ask myself, cool, this is awesome. Very smart people. Does Topo work with companies that have startup seed funded budgets? No, they do not, right? So like, we have to think to ourselves, okay, if a really good organization is recommending, you know, a certain style of sales org, right, with sales enablement and ABM and this sort of software and all this stuff, are you as a company with $3 million in funding going to take that advice? No, you can't, right? So it's about, it's not saying thought leaders are right or wrong. It's saying their advice should be taken in context, and through no fault of their own. The format often doesn't let them say, I'm going to spend 3 paragraphs qualifying this advice and who it's for before I give it. So you kind of have to know who it's for. And this comes up often with, I'm going to address, you know, founder CEOs in this, especially newer founder CEOs with this comment, because this happens all the time, is they have the same play, and it sucks every time. They get lunch with a founder friend, and they come back and they come to their team and they just run a train on the whole strategy because their CEO friend said they do it this way. This happens everywhere. I see it everywhere. And it frustrates the hell out of every sales leader, because they're like, oh shit, she got lunch with a CEO friend of hers. I guess we're going to just throw the whole strategy in the trash because apparently something new is happening, right? And like, don't do that, because your CEO friend, you know, you got lunch with Parker Cotto when he was at Zenefits, and, you know, he said to do it this way. we're not there, right? So, bless her heart, one of my bosses in the past, came back from a meeting and she was like, so where are we going to put our 100-person SDR team in Phoenix or Denver? And I was like, we have 7 SDRs and hold the phone, right? Hold the phone. So you just need to, when you look at advice being taken, mine included, anyone's advice, who are they? Why are they saying it? What are their motives behind this? And is that advice intended for me or is it not? And know that they may not have the time to babysit your ability to interpret it or not. They're doing their thing. They're not trying to babysit you. They're taking care of themselves. So think critically when taking advice and ask yourself, is this, and it's hard to do when you don't know what you're doing with sales leadership. You have a founder and you're doing all sorts of stuff. But it can be dangerous and it's really damaging for culture if your VP of sales is just thinking to themselves, man, are they going to come back from this meeting and just throw my beautiful strategy in the trash because somebody told them something that they liked in the moment? It's going to shift next week, right?
Yeah.
So just be careful of that, especially founder level people who are going everywhere at once. Sales leaders, a little bit less of that. They tend to be more like, no, I'm going to take the advice I want. I know more what I'm doing, but it's a big thing. And even when it comes to thought leaders on that we hear of now, we have to ask those questions. The biggest ones get big and then they work with big companies. So if you're a big company, you're likely to have it apply to you. If you're a smaller company, you have to find people who are focused more on the seed environment. And there's just different schools of thought, different budgets, different everything, right? So, qualify what you hear, try to think critically, step back. And, as a wise man once said, don't believe them.
I think what's so profound about what you said is it's not just about being able to adapt to circumstance. It's really also about like where are managers and trainers drawing their information about how to improve. And so I wanted to walk through a little use case with you. So let's say, someone's been, trained 10 years in cold calling or maybe cold emailing, whatever channel you'd like. And they're trying to learn new skills or new activities or try to figure out new traits to look for in SDR hires at a new company. So with that in mind about, how people are learning and building knowledge about how to improve, what can managers do to learn from hire to hire, whether it be a good fit or a bad fit?
It's a good question. I think, if the question's around what can you do to open your mind up again to different ways of looking at this, the key traits that I think of are, how do you as a leader cultivate humility and creativity, right? And that's difficult to do. And honestly, when I started RevenueZen, I had a much more inbred idea from my own experience of how things should be done. And I was very guilty of this. We all still are, right? But I came in, I was like, cool, I have the formula, this is how it's done. And I quickly realized that it worked pretty well for some companies, but it was changing. So what I tried to do is block off time to not only learn from others who are different from me. One decision I made was to bring on a co-founder who had a background in content marketing, a strong background in content and none in sales. And so I immediately learned a lot of new things about not like SEO and how good content and writing and editing, but eventually formed this idea of SDRs being their own little content marketing hubs. And that sort of was a good humbling experience for me, especially after seeing, okay, we're getting a lot of clients from my LinkedIn posts. SDRs can do this too. What do content marketers know that they can teach salespeople about? And vice versa, right? How can salespeople tell the content teams and guide them what to write about? So making those decisions is one thing. You can surround yourself with people intentionally that know different things. Marketers and product people are great fits for this, right? Make friends in product, make friends in marketing, like good close friends, and be friends, have dinner with them, get to know them as people, and just really internalize this different mindset, and just bake that into your brain, because you'll create a very undiverse thought process if you don't do it. And then the time for creativity too, right? Is you have to actually go on your calendar and block off part of your day, and honestly, go for a bike ride and dedicate yourself to thinking through all of your assumptions and while you're working out, and try to let some of them be let go and drop off, right? Think about what are these, and ask yourself, okay, what assumptions do I have about how this process should be done? And then just think, okay, so my philosophy on sales development is we should have this many SDRs doing this number of DOS per day and blah, blah. Okay, and then ask yourself, why do I think that? Where did that belief come from? Well, it came from a job where I did that, and then I had a management position where I led teams doing that, and it worked. And then just ask yourself, should that work all the time? And sit with the answer of it and be like, well, maybe not, right? And ask yourself, do I know any SDRs who are doing things differently and having success? Yeah, I do, right? And Sales Loft had a good article a while back in one of their early guides where they had a good example of like, look, there are top 2 SDRs. One sends a ton of email. One's always on the phone. Neither one is better or worse, right? But they just know themselves. They know their market better. And examples like that, I mean, it may be hypothetical, but the point was in pushing different perspectives into your mindset helps you be more humble about your own and say, okay, maybe I don't know everything, right? And at this point, RevenueZen has had, almost 70-ish total clients or projects in our lifespan, including the active ones right now. And so we've had just an absolute flood of humbling information about, what works, doesn't work, where things are going, what people and teams are better in what situations, what advice to give to whom and what to qualify. And so that's been really helpful. But it's hard to do that if you're at one company and not an agency, because you're not going to get that. And so you have to do things like network, make friends outside the company, make friends with engineers, right? And so it's fun because a lot of engineering friends, and when we take on a client who sells to CTOs and heads of QA, I can call people and be like, hey, Eric, what do you think of this, right? As an engineer, what would you respond to this? And like that perspective helps me understand, okay, maybe if I'm going from a company where I sold to heads of marketing, now I'm selling to heads of IT, I need to be able to step into a new perspective. And that involves really dedicating yourself personally at a deep level to accommodating a lot of new perspectives. And that starts beyond business. It starts, way, way deeper inside. And if you really want to get better, then you have to actually do that. You have to actually make it a personal priority to understand new perspectives. And then ask yourself, how does this play back into my sales, hiring activity, every part of the strategy? Because it does. So I would just recommend go all in as deep as you can to the learning and humbling of yourself to avoid assumption-based mindset.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. And it's also something that, deep down, I think everyone kind of understands and really makes sense to them, but it's hard to put into practice. Like you said, it's a lot easier if you're at an agency and you have all of these various industries and company sizes that you're working with to get all of this information from. But if you're the VP of sales at a medical device company, that's what and that's really kind of what you're stuck with. So it's up to you to sort of put yourself out there and really understand other experiences to then shape how not only you hire, but how you sort of treat the SDRs that you currently have. And I guess that kind of brings up a question where let's say you are that VP of sales and you have a team and you've been sort of on this one track the whole time, you haven't really had the opportunity to learn other people's experiences or dive into it. And then you start doing that and you realize we could be doing something differently. How do you then sort of scale that knowledge out to the rest of your team to then improve the SDRs that you have? Or is it maybe a lost cause at that point and you kind of have to rehire and go through the whole process again?
No, it's not a loss. It's never a lost cause. But change management is a real thing. So just, I think people underestimate change management's difficulty and how to roll out new things to your team. But I've done it before and it's tons of fun. It's a thankless thing that you do. But the results are clear once it's done, which is great. The biggest things I find are, pick up the book Switch on this, which is a fantastic book about how people change their mind and what to do with it. Another thing is to lead by example, right? So if I say, if you're in sales and you need to be producing content and also doing outbound, we should be doing that too, right? So I can't go to people and say, my best pitch when we're talking about our content services is I pull up my own LinkedIn. I'm getting beers with somebody. I'm like, all right, let me just show you how this did. Look, okay, this one 10,000 views on it, and this was 2 prospects that commented on it, and see what I did. I just literally have my phone out, I'm doing this. Look, really good way to do it, right? And you can do that with your sales reps too. Of here's how it works for me. And so trying some of this stuff out is a great thing. Whenever you're learning new things. it's a good idea in general. My first job, our sales manager would occasionally like take a batch of leads and get on the phones just to like, be back,
Whoa, spice
right?
some stuff up.
Oh yeah, hey, yeah, he's on the phones. Oh, DJ's doing it. Oh, okay, look at him. It was great. It was sort of like rallying for us. Another technique I have for change management is to roll things out slowly and create like an inbound marketing internally. So I create intrigue around a new thing. For example, at my last company, we were rolling out a new sales engagement platform. And so what I did is I had one person pilot it, and then someone else asked if they could join. And we were like, all right, yeah, sure, you can get a license too. And we told the vendor like, hey, this is how we're going to roll this out. We're going to roll it out one by one, and then have people want to use it. And after a couple months, the people using this new platform were like, yeah, I really enjoyed this. It's kind of fun, actually. I've made a game out of it where like I see how many personalized emails I can do with this platform in a certain amount of time. And they were going from like a more templated to a more personalized strategy. And the platform was designed to help them reduce the time impact of that. And so then everyone's like, hey, you're getting a lot of meetings from this. Can we all use this? And then we're like, oh, I guess you can, right? So instead of me saying, here's this new strategy, like go for it, use it, I have a talk with one person who'll be very receptive to it, have them adopt it, and they're my new champion. So we take our sales skills and we apply them internally. Many people don't do that. They assume that selling stops once you're off the prospect. It doesn't. Your hardest sales are the internal ones. How do you get your CEO on board with it, and your team on board with it, and your marketing team on board with it, and everybody else, right? How's operations gonna think about the CRM impact of what you're doing, right? So that's a much more fun and harder sale, in my opinion, than selling a prospect. Closing deals with clients, it's like we've done just hundreds and hundreds of those. So it's like it's not quite as fun. But I haven't done more than much more than a handful of really good internal big initiatives that are like large things, right? Starting a company, you do more of them, but so does everyone. That's one thing is to think about the internal sale and the change management aspect as a really important thing, and try to roll things out slowly, get buy-in along the way, lead from behind or below, and let people who take the charge who are the beneficiaries of it instead of handing it down. Sending an email out, this is now a mandatory process, send. Not great, right?
No one's going to do it.
Exactly. So you're going to be pulling teeth. And if you're rolling out, if you're going to a more ABM focused strategy and you're bringing a consultant to help, the consultant should be helping you think about change management. They should be helping you with it. If they're not, they should be explaining to you how you're going to do it. Otherwise, you get a big expensive playbook dropped on your desk that no one uses. Spend a bunch of money and nothing changes, right? That's a very hard reality.
I think that's really valuable what you said, and to be honest, I wouldn't really expect it from anyone but an owner and a founder that would have that capability to see the big picture change and be able to influence it. And what's interesting to me is not all sales leaders kind of have control over that dial. So to kind of move into the organization as a whole, what can these managers, let's say they're training their first SDR or they're making some changes in their organization, what are some of the things that they can seek out other than, the technologies that can help them get where they need to be and have those successful hiring outcomes?
Yeah, good question. Some of the big things are if you are in a manager role, you're not really selling prospects anymore. So your personal brand, your content, everything starts to become focused around hiring, right? And this includes networking, getting to know people at different companies, having conversations with SDRs. Not for like I want to recruit you right now, but just sort of having conversations. And again, applying your sales skills not quite internally, but to the recruiting process now and to your personal brand. So when we need to hire, it's really, really easy because I just ask people, hey, can we have some referrals? And they pop in. And when we need more than that, it's enough on LinkedIn for me to be like, I'm hiring, and I write a good post on it. And we get some leads that way for new hires. And so, but the reason I can do that is because I've invested a ton of time into having good conversations, building up a network, and putting in the groundwork to make it look easy. It looks easy, but it wasn't, right? That's the big secret of all this stuff is people who can hire really well have done all the hard work of making a great culture already. where everyone sort of knows this is the place to be. So it's somewhat rare that we actually send messages saying, hey, I think you might be a good fit for this role. Let's have a chat, like the outbound recruiting. We rarely do that. I've done it one time when we had to hire 5 people in 2 weeks. That was the one time we did it. And that was just, I slept enough, but not quite enough. Apart from that, it's just based around that. And so one impact of this whole mass market to ABM shift we see in a lot of roles is many people are burned out at bad managers who just want them to make dials all day regardless of the impact. And sometimes that's the right call, right? Managing activities is a good call. But when you have really smart people who know that there's maybe better approaches, that multi-channel might help them better, that focusing on doing a certain type of call or doing things in a different way or getting a little bit more discretion over the process and creativity would lead to better outcomes, then they seek out not just companies, but managers specifically who believe the things that they believe. When in my intro calls with SDR hires, I'm talking about what I believe about sales in general, the state of the union of the industry, things I believe as a person, how we run the company, and we're able to get really good talent. That's the biggest thing is people are now aware that this is who we are. And so all their friends want to work here too. And we constantly have this like bench of people who are like, whenever you're ready, right? And that's what we rely on. Yeah, and so it's a great thing to have because I never have to worry about that talent. But you have to take the steps internally first. You have to invest in your own culture and take the advice, right? So if you are a manager who is just bearing down your team with make more dials all day and you don't actually help them get better, you'll create a culture where you have to buy their frustration with salary. I've been in a position before too, where I was like, I didn't phrase it this way, but I was like, here's the comp plan that I would like. And it's sort of understood that like, you're being annoying enough that you need to pay me significantly more to stay here. And eventually the rate outweighs what I know you can budget for. And that's when I have to leave. And that's a horrible position to be in, right? But if people are extraordinarily happy with the way you run your team and your company, with the way your comp plan is designed, right? Is it based around the things that actually matter? And are you managing to that, right? Are you paying people on a certain metric, but managing them only to dials? Cool, you're going to frustrate people. Do you not have any flexible work environments, right? If you need to take your daughter to Taekwondo on Fridays at 3 p.m., can you do that? Or is that frowned upon, right? If it's frowned upon, you frustrate good SDRs into not wanting. So the list goes on, but you need to first craft that internally and then sort of let that go externally too. And let the world sort of know what you believe. I would use a different term than value signaling because it's got a negative connotation, but honestly, like signal your values of what you believe so that people understand what they are. How else are you gonna, that's what it is. Let people know what you believe so that they can be attracted to it. It's the same principle for anything. And when you're hiring, you're going to find people who believe those things too. So if you want to craft a culture of, mid-market SDRs that are both high energy, but good at asking great questions, be high energy and ask great questions. It's not that hard, right? Like you have to just be able to embody the model of what you want. And if you really do that, and again, take it to heart, you'll have no problem hiring because you have built a brand, you have had conversations and networking conversations. You have friends who know people who know people. All your existing team will make referrals because they'll know who you want to hire because you'll be very clear about it. And they'll know in their hearts that you stick to what you believe. So if you do all these things and you have a lot of consistency through it, you'll have better hiring outcomes, especially at the top of the funnel, to just attract more of the right candidate to the process based on the way you've crafted it.
Yeah, and that's just so important now because like the organizations need the right candidates to successfully execute their strategy. And it's, just as SDRs need to be more personalized in their outreach, I think organizations need to be more personalized in how they look for people and who they're recruiting for. So a lot of practice what you preach and really just making sure that you're putting out a message that you feel comfortable with and that you want people to see rather than the generic, like, we need an SDR. Please make calls and get us meetings.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Alex, thank you so much for joining us today. Where can the audience find you if they want to learn more about RevenueZen?
My LinkedIn profile. I'm going to practice what I preach. Just go to my LinkedIn, hit the connect button with a note or follow. I love having these non-sales networking conversations. And I'm having one, in a couple of days with someone who said, I don't think I'm a good sales opportunity for you, but I'm happy to grab a bourbon. And I was like, trust me, I do not need more sales, but I would like some bourbon. So let's learn from each other there, or any other way. But that's the best way to get in touch. And then RevenueZen.com if you're a leader watching this and are interested in the type of stuff we do. But yeah, I am friendlier than I look and would love to chat.
You look pretty friendly, so can't even imagine what that would be like.
Oh boy.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Alex.
Yeah.